Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Fisher Family Podcast. Today, we're going to talk about a topic that we can strongly relate to, with that being the evolution of the American dream and the idea of nuclear families. We're going to touch on the 1950s show Leave It to Beaver, as well as the relationships between marriages and the short story The Leaving. I would like to introduce you guys to the rest of the Fisher family, introducing my father, my mother, and my sister. I would like to thank everyone for being here today. Now, what I want to first talk about is that people may argue that we are Canadian instead of American, and that we can't really say that we live in the American dream. But for mom and dad, is there a real difference between the Canadian and the American dream?
No, I don't really think so. I think the Canadian dream is very similar to the American dream. I think both countries represent opportunities for life improvement.
And for dad, what do you think?
Well, the phrase American dream is what we have come to know from our exposure to American culture, for example, through television. The Canadian dream would be, I think, basically the same thing because our culture is so similar to America's. We share the same dreams, for example, financial security, owning a house, having a family, freedom, general happiness, and equal opportunity.
Thank you. Now, Leave It to Beaver is a show representing a nuclear family. But I recognize that this show, while watching it, it shows the good within a nuclear family, but not the bad. Like mom. Just like the mother in the show, you also stay at home and do a lot of work around the house. How stressed do you become?
Sometimes I feel very stressed and overwhelmed. I want to ensure a good family life for my family, so I usually have a lot to do in a day. Some days not everything goes as planned, and new challenges come up that I must deal with. Life is never boring as a mother.
Thank you. And as well as for dad, how does it feel to be a father and being our main source of income?
I feel being a father and supporting my family financially gives me a sense of purpose and pride. Growing up watching my parents and grandparents probably pointed me towards that way of life. But having a family, seeing them do well, and knowing I had something to do with that is a very great feeling.
Thank you. So now, Haley, I want to ask you this as my sister. A scene that I recognize in the episode is that the younger sibling is asking the older sibling for advice because basically what happened at school, right, is that he received a letter and he thought the letter might be bad and he was wondering, what punishments will I face at school, right? So, as an older sister of a younger brother, which is me, how do you feel of giving your younger sibling advice?
I love having the opportunity to give my younger sibling advice because it makes me feel like they love and respect me. I have been able to help my brother with recording his drama and English presentations. I love watching him succeed, especially when I know I played a role in his achievements. I find giving advice to be a bonding experience that strengthens sibling relationships.
Thank you. So, another scene that I recognize, and this is a question for all of you guys, is the family, they were eating around like a dinner table. Like in the old times, everyone sits around a table and they eat food, right? And they talk about their days. But I realized that we don't really do this anymore, and I feel like the idea of the family, the nuclear family is changing. So, are nuclear families changing in the future with gender roles and traditions?
Yes, I think nuclear families are constantly changing. As life has become faster paced over the years, I think fathers have taken a larger role in their children's lives. I think there is a larger acceptance and expectations of fathers to be more involved in duties such as raising children and doing housework.
Well, the traditional nuclear family is two adults, usually married and living with their children in the same household. I think this is still most common type of family that we see in society. But other family structures are becoming more and more prevalent than they once were, like single parent families, step families, and multi generational households.
And Haley, what about you?
I think that the definition of nuclear family is changing to demonstrate the progress of gender, race, and the LGBTQ community. In new Netflix TV shows, there are interracial couples and same sex couples of children. The ideal family is no longer a man and a woman with distinct roles. Men are now seen in a domestic setting, and women are depicted as the breadwinners.
Thank you. So this is sort of the next topic I want to talk on, is the idea of nuclear families changing. For example, in the short story The Leaving by Maureen Hines, we see the relationships between the mother and father over time. As the father, he first treated her like an object. This story took place in the 70s, by the way. And for example, the father would say, call her woman instead of her actual name, and she would always, or he would always demand her to basically do work around the house and almost like a maid in a way. But then at the end, he actually appreciates her and loves her since the mother stood up for herself. So for Mom, I want to ask you this. In The Leaving, we see the mother and father had distinct roles as well, but also horrible treatment to the wife. How do you think the appreciation for mothers have changed over time?
I think as life has gotten faster paced, society is more aware of all that mothers do. I think there is strong evidence that supports that children that are well educated, well mannered, and well rounded usually have a very strong relationship with their parents. I think that because mothers are now driving their children to sports, etc., the role of the mother in the family is more visible than just the typical expectation of cleaning a house. Therefore, I think appreciation for mothers has grown over the years even more.
Thank you. And for Dad, I know that you don't have your wife working, but how would you feel if you had a wife working a job as well? What is good? What is bad?
Well, my wife has a job, a very important job, and that's looking after our family and our household. We made that decision long ago together when we had children and for Mom to stay at home. And I'm glad we did that. It was very important to us. But if you mean if Mom worked outside the home, the benefit would be, of course, extra income. But for me, that doesn't outweigh the benefit of her being here for you, looking after yourself and your sister. Instead of relying on daycare, for instance, at a younger age.
Thank you. And I just learned something new, and all you guys should too, that mothers, even though sometimes they do not have like a paying job, they're not going to work, they actually still are basically doing a whole job at home, taking care of all of us and teaching us the proper lessons. So that's something that I strongly learned today, and I hope you guys learned that too. So, since nuclear families are changing, and if they are changing, do you believe that this changes the idea of the American or Canadian dream?
I think the roots of the American Canadian dream are the same. However, as the nuclear family changes, I think the dream has gotten bigger. I think the American Canadian dream means opportunities for a great quality of life. As the opportunities grow, such as more education, I think families are having a desire for a higher quality of life than maybe years prior. For example, having a family as shown in Leave It to Beaver was the dream years prior. But now living the American Canadian dream for a woman may be having a career outside of the home or owning her own car.
And Dad, what about you? What do you have to say?
I would say that the American Canadian dream has often been depicted as having a traditional nuclear family, but I think the dream is pretty much the same for most people, regardless of the family type that they might have, because the dream is not specifically about the type of family you have anymore, but more about having a happy life, and happiness can be defined for in many different ways for different people.
Thank you. And Haley, do you have anything to say?
I believe that the American-Canadian dream differs in meaning for different families who have different goals. I think the meaning of family is beyond race, gender, religion, class, and sexuality.
All right, and now this is the final question to you guys. And this is for Mom and Dad. Do you both believe that you guys have fulfilled the Canadian or American dream?
Yes, I believe we have fulfilled the Canadian dream. I have a happy marriage with 2 happy, healthy children. We are all on track to be university educated. We live in a nice home and we have been able to take some vacations. What more could anyone want?
And Dad, what do you think?
Well, I guess if the question is, do we have everything we ever wanted, then I would say no, because I wanted to become a tennis professional and own a big, large sailboat. But those are more like lottery dreams. So if you look at Canadian and / American dream, the question really is, are we having a good life? Are we living how we would like to live? Are we living where we'd like to live and who we would like to live with? And to that definition, I would say absolutely yes, we've achieved the Canadian dream.
All right. As you can see, the evolution of the nuclear family changed. The format of the nuclear family has changed as the idea of it has changed. We see that the parents of the family are both working instead of the mother staying at home. The idea of the American dream is not a set criteria really anymore, as families have different ideas of the American dream. As some families may be just happy they're just living the dream for just being here, but other families may say they're living the dream for being very wealthy. Families have different ideas of the American dream, while in the 1950s, the American dream showed a set criteria of what it should be like, as we see in Leave It to Beaver. We learned a lot from this topic, and we hope you did as well. Thank you for listening to the Fisher Family Podcast. Goodbye.